At my husband's will reading, my daughter-in-law declared I wasn't an heir, suggesting I only happened to live in his house. My own son, Daniel, looked away, then told me it would be better if I waited outside. After 45 years of marriage, I left the room, humiliated but determined. They just underestimated me. Stick with my story to see what truly happened next. Like, share, and let me know where you're listening from. 3 weeks. That's all it had been since they lowered Arthur's casket into the cold earth. 3 weeks since the world tilted on its axis, leaving 8-year-old Eleanor adrift, numb, and feeling utterly displaced. Now, here she sat in the sterile, hushed office of Mr. Davies, Arthur's longtime attorney, for the reading of his will. The air was thick with unspoken tension, a stark contrast to the buzzing silence that had settled in her heart since Arthur's passing. Every creak of the leather chair, every rustle of papers, felt amplified, an intrusion on her fragile composure. She simply wanted it over, wanted to retreat to the quiet sanctuary of her home, to mourn in peace. The door opened, and Daniel, her son, stepped in. A faint, almost apologetic smile touched his lips, but it didn't reach his eyes. He offered a quick, shallow nod in her direction, then took a seat not beside her, but directly across the large mahogany table, putting a physical and emotional distance between them. His gaze was fixed on the polished tabletop, avoiding hers, a gesture that twisted a familiar ache in Eleanor's chest. She had longed for his embrace, for the comfort of her son in her darkest hour, but he had been distant, preoccupied, since Arthur fell ill. Before Eleanor could process Daniel's coldness, the door swung open again, and Serena, her daughter-in-law, swept in. She moved with a predatory confidence, her expensive black dress hugging her slender frame, a stark, almost theatrical contrast to the somber occasion. Her dark eyes, usually veiled, now held a glint of triumph that made an unsettling shiver run down Eleanor's spine. Serena's presence had always been unsettling, a discordant note in the melody of their family life. Today, it felt like a discordant roar. She took the seat next to Daniel, a possessive hand settling on his arm, and favored Eleanor with a saccharine smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. Mr. Davies, a man whose gentle demeanor belied decades of navigating complex family affairs, cleared his throat. He adjusted his spectacles, his expression grave, and began to read Arthur's last wishes. His voice, steady and calm, listed the assets, the family residence, a place brimming with 45 years of memories, laughter, and quiet moments, a sprawling property in Colorado, where Arthur had always dreamed of retiring, various investments and holdings that Eleanor knew little about, leaving Arthur to manage the business while she made their house a home. Suddenly, Serena's voice cut through the solemn recitation, sharp and precise as a surgeon's scalpel. "Excuse me, Mr. Davies," she interjected, her tone deceptively polite. "But this meeting is for heirs only, isn't it?" Her gaze, unwavering and cold, flicked to Eleanor. "I mean, Eleanor only happened to live in his house, didn't she? She doesn't have any legal claim to his estate, does she?" The implication hung in the air, thick and suffocating. Eleanor's breath hitched. She wasn't just being excluded. Her entire 45 years of marriage, her partnership with Arthur, was being dismissed as an inconsequential accident. Eleanor turned to Daniel, her eyes pleading for support, for a flicker of recognition, a sign that he understood the venom in Serena's words. But he merely stared at his hands, his knuckles white against his dark trousers. After a tense moment of silence, he finally spoke, his voice low and carefully neutral. "Mom," he began without lifting his head, "maybe it would be better if you waited outside." A profound silence descended, broken only by the frantic beat of Eleanor's own heart. Mr. Davies, usually so composed, looked up, a frown creasing his brow. "Daniel, with all due respect, Eleanor is Arthur's widow, his wife of nearly half a century. She absolutely has a right to be here." But Serena was quick to dismiss him. "Oh, Mr. Davies, please. We all know Eleanor had her little hobbies, of course, but she never actually contributed to the business, did she? Never really understood the complexities of Arthur's investments. We need to focus on what's practical, what's legal. Her words were a physical blow, stripping away every ounce of Eleanor's dignity, her worth, her very identity as Arthur's partner. Humiliation, sharp and searing, flooded her. A raw, unfamiliar rage, cold and distant, began to stir within her. Trembling, Eleanor pushed back her chair. The sound grated on the polished floor. She nodded slowly, forcing a composure she didn't feel. "Very well," she managed, her voice barely a whisper. "I'll wait outside." As she turned to leave, she heard Serena's low, satisfied laugh, a sound that etched itself into Eleanor's memory, promising to haunt her. She stumbled down the hallway, her vision blurring, and found refuge in a small, empty bathroom. She locked the door, leaned against a stall, and finally, the dam broke. Sobs tore through her, wrenching from the deepest part of her being. She crumpled to the cold tile floor, weeping not just for Arthur, but for the profound betrayal, for the loss of her son, for the cruel dismissal of a lifetime. What had gone wrong? How had she ended up here? Discarded and humiliated. The drive home was a blur. The familiar route, the trees, the houses, they all seemed alien, detached. As she stepped into the spacious foyer, the house felt deafeningly silent, vast and empty. Every corner, every object, whispered Arthur's name, echoing with his presence. But now, that cherished presence was tainted, overshadowed by the chilling betrayal she had just endured. She remembered the first time Serena had walked through these doors, 5 years ago. Daniel had brought her home for Thanksgiving, beaming, oblivious to the hawk-like intensity in Serena's eyes. Eleanor, ever the warm hostess, had tried to make her feel welcome. But Serena hadn't been interested in pleasantries. Her eyes had scanned the antique furniture, the expensive art, the sprawling gardens, an immediate, calculated assessment of their wealth. She'd asked pointed, intrusive questions about Arthur's business, his investments, his long-term plans, barely pausing to sip her wine. Eleanor had felt a prickle of unease, a gut feeling that this woman saw only numbers, not family. Eleanor had tried to voice her concerns to Arthur later that night. He had laughed, dismissing her worries with a wave of his hand, calling her paranoid. "She's just curious, dear. A sharp girl, Daniel's lucky." But Eleanor had watched Daniel slowly drift away, like a boat untethered from its moorings. Serena dominated their conversations, subtly at first, then more overtly. She pushed Daniel's brilliant business ventures, urging Arthur to provide significant financial backing, always framing it as an investment in Daniel's future, their legacy. The dinner table, once a place of lively family banter, became a boardroom. Serena discussing succession planning, the need for streamlining, and Arthur's eventual retirement. Arthur, initially dismissive, eventually grew defensive. He started accepting Serena's ideas, agreeing that he was getting older, that it was time to pass on responsibility. Eleanor watched, helpless, as her husband, once so vibrant and independent, was slowly convinced to cede control, piece by piece. The final blow had come 6 months before Arthur's death, when Serena and Daniel had pushed Arthur to simplify his finances, consolidate assets, and create a clearer, more efficient structure. Serena had already been planning, Eleanor realized now, to exclude her completely. The memory of Daniel's text message, sent just days before Arthur died, flashed in her mind. "Mom, it's all taken care of. You're too old to handle grief and affairs right now. Leave it to me." It wasn't a gesture of comfort. It was a final, dismissive insult, a sentence passed down by her own son. 3 days. That's how long it took for the sting of humiliation to morph into a quiet, simmering resolve. 3 days since Daniel's dismissive text message, since Serena's cruel words, since her son's utter betrayal at Arthur's will reading. Eleanor found herself standing before the imposing oak door of Arthur's study, a room she had always respected as his sanctuary, his domain of numbers and decisions. Today, however, it felt different. A sense of purpose propelled her forward, a silent defiance against the injustice that had been dealt. She pushed the door open, the faint scent of old paper and Arthur's familiar cologne greeting her. She scanned the room, her eyes systematically cataloging the leather-bound books, the intricate globe, the overflowing bookshelves. Her gaze finally settled on the large mahogany desk, usually meticulously organized. She approached it cautiously, a tremor running through her. Arthur had always kept his financial documents, his investment records, in the top drawer, meticulously labeled. But as she opened it, a knot tightened in her stomach. The files were a mess, some incomplete, others conspicuously missing. It was clear Daniel and Serena had already been through them, their greedy hands sifting through Arthur's life, searching for their spoils. A cold certainty settled over her. They had taken what they believed was theirs, leaving her with scraps. Then, a flicker of memory. Arthur. His mischievous grin, his eyes twinkling. He had often joked about a secret stash, a place he'd squirrel away treasures, just in case. He'd once pointed vaguely towards the basement, muttering something about his old workshop and a false wall. At the time, Eleanor had simply indulged him, thinking it one of his charming quirks, a playful fantasy. Now, it resonated with a sudden, startling clarity. Eleanor descended into the basement, the air cooler and heavy with the scent of sawdust and oil. Arthur's workshop was exactly as he'd left it. Tools neatly hung, projects half-finished. Her eyes scanned the walls, searching for any anomaly, any hint of a hidden compartment. And there it was. A section of paneling, subtly different from the rest. A faint line where wood met wood, almost imperceptible to the casual eye. With a surge of adrenaline, she pushed against it. It creaked inward, revealing a small, dark recess. Inside, nestled snugly, was a safe, its metallic surface gleaming in the dim light. It wasn't a large safe, but it radiated an aura of importance. Eleanor's heart pounded. She ran her fingers over the cool metal, then noticed the keypad. What could the password be? Arthur had always been so particular, so sentimental. Their anniversary? His birthday? No, too obvious. Then, her eyes fell upon her wedding ring, a simple gold band Arthur had slipped onto her finger 45 years ago. Etched on the inside, barely visible, were a series of numbers, coordinates, the exact latitude and longitude of the small, secluded park bench where he had proposed, a place they often revisited, a private symbol of their enduring love. With trembling fingers, Eleanor entered the coordinates. There was a soft click, and the heavy door swung open. Inside, amidst stacks of financial documents and investment certificates, was a thick manila envelope, addressed to her in Arthur's familiar, elegant handwriting. Her name, Eleanor, in bold, decisive strokes. She pulled out the letter, her hands shaking slightly. As she read, Arthur's voice seemed to fill the silent basement, a comforting presence in the midst of her turmoil. He wrote of his growing concerns about Serena, her insatiable greed, her manipulative influence over Daniel. He expressed his deep disappointment in their son's weakness, his willingness to be swayed, to betray his own mother. Eleanor, my love, the letter began. I've seen this coming. Serena's claws have been in Daniel for years, and I regret not seeing it sooner, or perhaps not acting sooner. But rest assured, I haven't left you unprotected. Arthur detailed, with astonishing clarity, how he had spent the last 2 years secretly transferring the majority of their liquid assets. The beautiful lake house where they had spent countless summers, and the lucrative downtown rental properties, all into Eleanor's name. It had been a complex, carefully orchestrated move, hidden even from his own legal team, executed through a series of offshore trusts and private accounts, untraceable by Daniel and Serena. What Daniel and Serena think they are inheriting, he wrote, is merely a fraction of what we actually built together. A paltry sum compared to the true wealth we accumulated, wealth that is now, rightfully, solely yours. His words brought tears to her eyes. But this time, they were tears of relief, of a profound, heart-wrenching gratitude. You, my darling Eleanor, the letter continued, earned every penny of this through 45 years of love, sacrifice, and unwavering partnership. You were my rock, my confidant, the heart of our home. You deserve every comfort, every security. Do not let them take it from you. Attached to the letter was a crisp business card. Miss Evelyn Reed, estate planning and asset protection attorney. A handwritten note scrawled beneath her name instructed, "Call her immediately. She knows everything." Eleanor sat there for what felt like an hour, sifting through the accompanying documents. The meticulously detailed transfers, the legal frameworks, the explicit instructions, it was all there. Arthur, in his final act, had been protecting her for years, building an impenetrable fortress around their shared legacy. The crushing weight of helplessness that had suffocated her since Arthur's death began to lift, replaced by a surge of something she hadn't felt in a long time. Power. Not vengeful power, but the quiet, dignified power of resilience, of vindication. Taking a deep, steadying breath, Eleanor picked up her phone and dialed the number on the business card. Miss Evelyn Reed answered on the second ring, her voice calm and professional. "Miss Eleanor Vance, I presume?" she said, as if expecting the call. "My sincerest condolences on your loss. Arthur was a remarkable man. I'm ready to discuss your situation whenever you are." Eleanor's voice was surprisingly steady. "My family," she began, a hint of steel in her tone. "They're trying to steal my inheritance." On the other end of the line, Miss Reed let out a soft, knowing chuckle. "I assure you, Miss Vance," she said, a hint of amusement in her voice. "They're about to discover they never had any inheritance to steal in the first place." A meeting was scheduled for the following morning. As Eleanor hung up, a genuine sense of hope, vibrant and strong, bloomed in her chest for the first time since Arthur's death. She took out her phone, opened her messages, and typed a cryptic text to Daniel. "Don't make any big plans with your inheritance just yet. I think you'll find there's been a slight miscalculation." The following morning, Eleanor found herself in front of a sleek, modern office building, its glass facade reflecting the morning Sunday mist. Evelyn Reed's firm, Reed & Associates, occupied the entire top floor, a testament to its success and reputation. As Eleanor stepped into the tastefully decorated reception area, a sense of calm washed over her. The crisp, efficient atmosphere, the quiet hum of activity, it all radiated competence. She felt, for the first time in weeks, that she was exactly where she needed to be. Miss Reed greeted her with a firm handshake and a warm, empathetic smile. She was everything Eleanor had imagined. Sharp, impeccably dressed, with eyes that missed nothing. "Miss Vance, thank you for coming," she said, ushering Eleanor into a spacious office overlooking the city. "Please, have a seat. Arthur spoke of you often, with immense love and respect. Once settled, Miss." Reed leaned forward, her expression serious. "Let's get straight to it. Arthur was a brilliant man, not just in business, but in foresight. He identified the potential problem with Serena and Daniel nearly 3 years ago, and he was absolutely determined to protect you, no matter what." Eleanor's heart ached with a familiar pang of sorrow. "He never said a word to me," she whispered. "He just kept telling me I was paranoid." "Exactly," Miss Reed confirmed. "He didn't want to worry you, Eleanor. He wanted you to live your life without the burden of his suspicions. But he also wasn't going to leave you vulnerable, not after everything you built together. He knew, deep down, that Daniel was becoming weak, easily manipulated by Serena. He saw her greed for what it was." Miss Reed then slid a document across the polished desk. "This," she stated, her voice devoid of emotion, "is what Daniel and Serena believe they are inheriting." Eleanor looked down. The document listed various assets: Arthur's primary business, a few smaller investments, and the family residence, totaling a seemingly respectable $1.2 million. This, Miss Reed added, is what they've been gleefully anticipating. What they believe justified their actions. Then, with a flourish, she presented another document, placing it directly over the first. This one, however, had Eleanor's name clearly emblazoned at the top. Eleanor gasped. The number was staggering, a total of $8 million. It included the lakeside retreat, the downtown rental properties, a diversified portfolio of stocks and bonds, and several other substantial assets Eleanor hadn't even known existed. The difference was astronomical, but I never signed for any of these transfers, Eleanor stammered, her mind reeling. I would have remembered. Miss Reed smiled knowingly. Arthur was meticulous, Eleanor. Do you recall those routine updates he'd ask you to sign for the business, or the insurance renewals that required your signature as co-owner of various properties? Eleanor's memory flashed back. Yes, she had signed numerous documents over the years, trusting Arthur implicitly, never bothering to read the fine print. He had always handled the legalities, the financial intricacies. She had simply trusted him. Those weren't just routine updates, Miss Vance, Miss Reed explained gently. They were carefully drafted legal documents, designed to transfer ownership of specific assets directly into your name, under various trusts and holding companies. Each one was perfectly legal, perfectly executed. Then came the final, devastating blow to Daniel's aspirations. As for the business Daniel thinks he inherited, Miss Reed continued, it's effectively a shell corporation. It appears to hold significant assets, but in reality, it carries substantial debt and very few active, profitable contracts. All of the genuinely profitable contracts, the valuable equipment, the key intellectual property, and the core real estate assets have been quietly transferred to separate entities, all of which you, Eleanor, now own outright. Eleanor felt a wave of conflicting emotions. Gratitude, sorrow, and a simmering fury. Why, Evelyn? She asked, using Miss Party, Reed's first name instinctively. Why did Arthur keep this from me? Why all the secrecy? Miss Reed's gaze softened. Because he loved you, Eleanor. He hoped, against all evidence, that Daniel would eventually come to his senses, that he wouldn't completely abandon you. This meticulous plan, as he called it, was his insurance policy. It was designed to protect you, ensure your financial security, and ultimately, to make Daniel understand the consequences of his choices, without Arthur having to be here to explain them himself. What are those consequences? Eleanor asked, her voice steady. Miss Reed retrieved another document. Arthur outlined a very specific set of conditions. Should Daniel side with Serena, as he clearly has, the trust provisions kick in immediately. She paused, letting the words hang in the air. Daniel will receive a modest monthly allowance of $3,000. This will be dispersed for 5 years. Beyond that, the continuation, or any increase, is contingent entirely on him demonstrating true financial responsibility and, critically, making genuine efforts to repair his relationship with you. Eleanor absorbed this. The quiet justice of it. And Serena? She asked. Her voice barely a whisper. Miss Reed's lips thinned. Serena, she stated explicitly, will receive nothing. Absolutely nothing. Arthur ensured she was never legally connected to any of the assets you now own, and he purposefully left her out of his will completely, citing her detrimental influence and predatory behavior. What if they try to contest it? Eleanor asked, a flicker of doubt in her mind. Miss Reed gave a dry laugh. Any legal challenge, she explained, would result in the immediate termination of Daniel's allowance. Furthermore, it would trigger a detailed, public investigation into all of Arthur's financial affairs, and, by extension, Daniel's own. Arthur was very good at keeping records, Eleanor. Let's just say, A public accounting would not reflect well on some of Daniel's investments and borrowings from the business over the years, particularly those pushed by Serena. Eleanor sat back, the weight of the world lifting from her shoulders. She was no longer a grieving, helpless widow. She was a woman who had been loved and protected, a woman with formidable power. A sense of righteous anger, cold and clear, settled over her. "I want to be there," she said, her voice firm. "When they find out, I want to see their faces." Miss Reed smiled, a hint of satisfaction in her eyes. Arthur anticipated that too. He left very specific instructions for the revelation. "It's a plan, Miss Vance, that is elegant in its simplicity, a fitting tribute to Arthur's cunning, and a testament to the justice he wanted for you." Miss Evelyn Reed laid out Arthur's meticulous plan. Mr. Davies, Arthur's longtime attorney, would call another meeting, ostensibly to correct oversights in the initial will reading, perhaps to clarify a few minor details. Serena and Daniel would expect to finalize their inheritance, to sign the papers and claim what they believed was rightfully theirs. It would be a moment of triumph for them, the culmination of their cruel machinations. But Arthur, ever the strategist, had orchestrated it to be their downfall. Before Eleanor left, Miss Reed handed her a sealed, heavy envelope. "Arthur asked that you read this after you understood the full financial arrangements," she explained softly. Eleanor took it, her fingers tracing the familiar script of her husband's name. Later that evening, in the quiet solitude of her living room, she broke the seal. Arthur's final message, written in a hand that betrayed both sorrow and fierce love, spoke volumes. "My dearest Eleanor, by now you know that I saw this coming. I'm so sorry you had to endure their cruelty, the indignity they put you through. You deserved better from our son, a lifetime of unwavering loyalty, not this calculated betrayal. It grieves me that Daniel chose this path, that Serena's avarice consumed him. But I can give you this, my love. The power to choose your own family from now on. You owe them nothing. Live your life, Eleanor, with the security and peace you've always deserved. Remember our love, and know that I will always be with you." Tears blurred Eleanor's vision, but they were not tears of sorrow. They were tears of profound gratitude for Arthur's love, for his foresight, for the strength he had given her even in death. Leaving Miss Evelyn Reed's office, Eleanor felt lighter than she had in years. The weight of grief still lingered, a dull ache, but the crushing burden of helplessness had vanished. She understood now. Serena and Daniel's perceived victory was about to become their devastating downfall. She had 3 days to prepare, 3 days to compose herself, to rehearse her calm demeanor, to mentally steel herself for the moment her son would learn the true, exorbitant price of his betrayal. She didn't want vengeance. She wanted justice, a quiet, undeniable reckoning. Friday arrived, clear and crisp. Eleanor dressed with unusual care, choosing a navy blue dress she hadn't worn in years, a color that always made her feel confident and poised. She arrived early at Mr. Davies's office, Miss Evelyn Reed by her side, a silent, formidable presence. Mr. Davies, aware of the true nature of this meeting, offered Eleanor a sympathetic smile and a reassuring nod. Serena and Daniel were already there, their confidence palpable, almost arrogant. Serena sat perched on the edge of her chair, meticulously checking her perfectly manicured nails, a small, self-satisfied smirk playing on her lips. Daniel, oblivious, was absorbed in his phone, scrolling through something, a faint smile on his face. Neither looked up, neither offered a greeting, barely acknowledging Eleanor's entrance. It was as if she were still invisible, still the woman to be dismissed. Eleanor walked past them, her head held high, and took her seat. She then turned to Daniel, who was still absorbed in his screen. "Daniel," she said, her voice calm and clear, "I'd like you to meet my attorney, Miss Evelyn Reed." Daniel's head snapped up from his phone, his eyes widening slightly as he registered Miss Reed's professional attire and stern expression. Serena, too, finally looked up, her expression shifting from complacency to a flicker of suspicion. The air in the room instantly crackled with a new tension. Miss Evelyn Reed offered a polite, professional smile to Mr. Davies, then turned her gaze to Daniel and Serena. "Good morning, everyone," she began smoothly. "We're here today to address some discrepancies in Arthur's initial will reading, and to clarify the distribution of certain additional assets that were not included in the original document." Daniel's eyes lit up, his earlier suspicion giving way to unconcealed avarice. "You mean?" he interrupted, a greedy glint in his eyes. "There's more money?" Eleanor watched him, observing the naked greed, the almost Pavlovian response to the mention of wealth. It confirmed everything Arthur had suspected, everything she had feared. Serena's influence had indeed corrupted him entirely. Miss Evelyn Reed maintained her calm, professional demeanor. "Indeed, Daniel. Quite a bit more, as it turns out." She then turned a page in her folder. "Let's start with the lake house, shall we?" A faint frown creased Daniel's brow. "The lake house? Dad always said the lake house would be mine someday. That's already accounted for, isn't it?" "Miss," Reed continued, unperturbed. "Actually, Daniel, the lake house was legally transferred into Eleanor's sole name approximately 5 years ago. It has been held in a private trust for her benefit ever since." Daniel scoffed, a dismissive wave of his hand. "That can't be right. That's ridiculous. Dad would never do that." Serena, her lawyer instincts kicking in, straightened in her chair, her eyes narrowing. "Mr. Davies, this is highly irregular. We need to see documentation. Legitimate, notarized documentation." Miss Evelyn Reed simply smiled, a thin, knowing curve of her lips. She reached into her briefcase and produced a stack of meticulously organized papers. "Here you go, Serena. The deeds, the trust agreements, the notarized signatures, all legally executed 5 years ago. Undeniable, I assure you." Serena snatched the documents, her face paling as she rapidly scanned the pages. Her initial bluster gave way to a growing horror. The signatures were indeed Arthur's, witnessed and notarized. The legal language was ironclad. And then, Miss Evelyn Reed continued, her voice resonating through the suddenly silent room. "We have the downtown rental properties, also legally transferred to Eleanor, along with the entire portfolio of Arthur's most significant investments, his valuable patents, and the majority of his liquid assets, all again securely in Eleanor's name or held in trusts for her sole benefit." With each revelation, Eleanor watched Serena's composure crumble. Her hands, which had been so confidently checking her nails, now shook uncontrollably. The color drained from her face, leaving her a ghostly white. Daniel, meanwhile, looked increasingly bewildered, his mouth slightly agape, the greedy glint in his eyes replaced by a dawning, confused panic. If you're gripped by Eleanor's story and waiting to see how this dramatic showdown unfolds, make sure to keep watching. Like this video, share it with someone who needs a dose of justice, and subscribe so you don't miss the final part of her journey. Now, back to the revelation. The air in Mr. Davies' office was so thick with unspoken shock, you could almost taste it. Serena's face was a mask of disbelief, her jaw slack, her eyes wide as she stared at the documents spread across the table. Daniel, for his part, seemed completely stunned, his gaze fixed on the endless stream of revelations Miss Evelyn Reed presented, each one dismantling his carefully constructed future. But the crescendo was yet to come. With a measured, deliberate movement, Miss Evelyn Reed presented the final folder, its contents seemingly insignificant compared to the stack of papers already revealed. Her voice, however, cut through the tension with the precision of a guillotine. "And finally," she announced, her gaze sweeping across the stunned faces, "the bulk of Arthur's liquid assets, a diversified portfolio of investments, and the remaining real estate, totaling approximately $8 million, legally belongs to Eleanor Vance. All of it has been held in irrevocable trusts for her sole benefit for the last several years." The words hung in the air, echoing in the deafening silence that followed. $8 million. It was a sum so immense, so utterly unexpected, that it paralyzed Serena and Daniel. Serena let out a soft, almost inaudible gasp, her hand flying to her mouth. Daniel simply stared, his eyes darting from the documents to Eleanor, then back again, as if willing the numbers to change, to lessen the blow. Miss Evelyn Reed wasn't finished. She calmly turned her attention to Daniel. Furthermore, Daniel, the company you believed you inherited, Vance Enterprises, is, as of this moment, effectively a shell corporation. It carries significant debts and obligations, accumulated largely through a series of ill-advised ventures and personal withdrawals over the past 3 years. All of the genuinely profitable contracts, the valuable equipment, the core client base, and the intellectual property have been transferred to a new entity, entirely controlled by Eleanor. What you inherited, Daniel, is essentially a very expensive liability. Daniel finally found his voice. A raw, incredulous whisper. But that's impossible. Dad would have told me. He would have explained. His eyes, now filled with a desperate, wounded confusion, finally met Eleanor's. Eleanor, who had remained silent throughout the entire, excruciating reveal, now spoke. Her voice was steady, calm, and utterly devoid of the tremor of humiliation that had shaken her just days before. He did plan for your future, Daniel, she said, her gaze unwavering. He planned for you to treat me with respect, to value family over ambition. He planned for you to be a good son. Instead, you chose to humiliate me, to dismiss 45 years of marriage, to try and cast me aside as if I were nothing. The truth of her words hung heavy in the air, undeniable. Serena's initial shock morphed into a furious, venomous rage. Her face flushed an angry red. "This is fraud!" she shrieked, slamming her hand on the table. "This is an old woman manipulating a dying man. We'll contest this. We'll expose you." Miss Evelyn Reed, without raising her voice, delivered a chilling counter. "I wouldn't advise that, Serena. Any legal challenge would immediately trigger specific trust provisions. This would not only terminate any potential allowance Daniel might receive, but also initiate a full, comprehensive audit of Arthur's entire estate for the past decade, including every transaction involving Daniel and yourself. Arthur was extremely diligent in his record-keeping. I assure you, such an audit would reveal far more than you'd care for the public to know about Daniel's investments and certain lavish personal expenditures from the company accounts." Daniel's face went white. The color drained from him, leaving him looking ghostly and sick. He knew exactly what an audit would uncover. The significant, unrepaid loans he'd taken from his father's company, the opulent lifestyle he and Serena had maintained, largely at Arthur's expense, all pushed by Serena's insatiable demands. The risk was too great. He swallowed hard, his eyes darting frantically between Serena's enraged face and Miss Evelyn Reed's impassive one. "What? What about a monthly allowance?" he stammered, his voice barely audible. Eleanor looked at him, a flicker of something akin to pity in her heart, quickly extinguished by the memory of his betrayal. "Yes, Daniel," she said. "Arthur did make provisions. You will receive $3,000 per month for the next 5 years. It's enough to live comfortably, to rebuild your life, should you choose to do so responsibly." Serena let out a guttural shriek of outrage. $3,000? That won't even cover our mortgage. This is absurd. This is a joke. Miss Evelyn Reed merely raised an eyebrow. "Perhaps," she suggested mildly. "A more modest living arrangement would be advisable, Serena." Serena's self-control completely evaporated. She turned her fury on Eleanor, her voice a raw, unhinged scream. "You bitter old woman. You've destroyed this family. Out of spite. You've ruined everything." Eleanor looked at Serena, then at Daniel, who sat slumped in his chair, utterly defeated. The anger she had felt was now replaced by a profound sadness. And yes, a touch of pity for the hollowed-out lives they had built. "I didn't destroy this family, Serena," Eleanor said, her voice clear and resonant. "You did. You corrupted my son. And Daniel. You allowed it to happen." Daniel, utterly broken, looked up at Eleanor, his eyes glistening with unshed tears. "Mom, please," he whimpered, trying to reach for her hand. "Serena." She pressured me. "I didn't mean to. We can work this out. Please, don't do this." Eleanor gently pulled her hand back. The moment of decision had come, and she was resolute. "There's nothing to work out. Daniel," she said, her voice firm, final. "At that will reading, Serena was showing me exactly who she is, and you, my son, were showing me exactly who you've become. There's no going back from that." She rose from her chair, her back straight, her head held high. Miss Evelyn Reed rose with her, a silent guardian. Eleanor paused at the door, turning one last time to look at Daniel, who now openly wept, his face a picture of despair. "It isn't fair, is it, Daniel?" she said, her voice carrying a world of sorrow and unyielding truth. "But that's not my fault, Daniel. That's yours." She walked out, leaving them in the stunned, desolate silence of a million shattered dreams. 6 months later, the early evening sun cast long, golden shadows across the deck of the lake house. Eleanor sat in her favorite Adirondack chair, a gentle breeze rustling the leaves of the old oak tree overhead. A profound peace, a quiet contentment she hadn't felt in years, settled over her. The lake, shimmering like a sheet of hammered copper, reflected the vast open sky. This house, once a cherished retreat, then a symbol of a future stolen, was now truly hers. She had transformed it, made it a home filled with her own taste, her own quiet joy. Elena, a kind woman from the nearby town, had become her housekeeper and, more importantly, a cherished friend. Her laughter, a welcome sound in the once silent rooms. Eleanor herself had undergone a subtle but significant transformation. The stress that had tightened her features for years had eased. She'd lost a bit of weight, her posture was straighter, and there was a new sparkle in her eyes. She'd even started painting classes, a hobby she'd long desired but never allowed herself the time for. Her canvases, filled with vibrant landscapes and abstract bursts of color, adorned the sunlit walls of her studio, each stroke a testament to her newfound freedom. Updates from Miss Evelyn Reed came periodically, concise and to the point. Serena and Daniel's predictable legal challenge had been swiftly quashed. Arthur's trust provisions were ironclad, his planning impenetrable. They had been forced to sell their sprawling condo, downsizing significantly to a modest apartment, the kind Eleanor used to think was just for young couples starting out. Serena, for the first time in years, had been forced to take a real job, a junior position at a marketing firm, a stark contrast to her previous life of luxurious leisure. Daniel, without Arthur's constant subsidies and financial bailouts, was struggling to keep the shell of his business afloat. The debts, Miss Evelyn Reed had highlighted now an overwhelming reality. Daniel occasionally called, always when Serena was not around. His apologies were stilted, hesitant, lacking any real understanding of the depth of his betrayal. He spoke of his mistakes, his regrets, but it felt hollow, tinged with a self-pity that didn't quite resonate with Eleanor. She listened patiently, offered brief, non-committal responses, and always ended the calls herself. One afternoon, Elena mentioned that Daniel had been asking about Eleanor at the local grocery store, trying to gauge her lifestyle, her emotional state. A strange satisfaction bloomed in Eleanor's chest. They were still watching her, still trying to assess her, but now from a distance, from a place of diminished power. The tables had truly turned. Then, last week, Daniel called again, his voice sounding genuinely tired, worn down. He admitted that Serena blamed him entirely, that she was still pushing him to find new legal avenues to contest the trust, clinging to the phantom of Arthur's wealth. "Mom," he confessed, his voice breaking. "I think Dad knew exactly what he was doing. He saw what I was becoming. He saw what Serena was doing to me." It was the first glimmer of true introspection, the first acknowledgement of his own complicity. And for the first time, Eleanor felt a tiny crack in her hardened heart. "I don't remember," he continued, a raw honesty in his tone. "How to be your son instead of her husband. I want to see you, Mom. I want to remember who I used to be, who we used to be." A silence stretched between them. Eleanor considered his words, weighing them carefully. Part of her wanted to simply close the door, to protect the fragile peace she had found. But another part, the mother in her, yearned for reconciliation, for some semblance of what they once had. "All right, Daniel," she finally said, her voice firm but with a softened edge. "Sunday dinner. Here. But Serena is not to come. Not now. Perhaps not ever." She paused, making sure her next words were clear, unmistakable. "And Daniel, I'm not the same woman you dismissed and humiliated. I've found my own way, my own strength. If you want a relationship with me, it has to be real. No games, no manipulations, no expectations. You have to earn it back." He apologized again, this time with a genuine tremor in his voice, a humility that hadn't been there before. "I understand, Mom. I really do. Thank you." As she hung up, a tiny spark of hope flickered within Eleanor. Maybe, just maybe, their relationship wasn't entirely unsalvageable. But even if it wasn't, Eleanor realized, her future no longer depended on them. She was free. Free from fixing their problems. Free from sacrificing her own needs for their ambitions. Arthur had given her more than just wealth. He had given her permission to live for herself. Her calendar was filled with new possibilities. Invitations to Elena's daughter's quinceañera, assisting in a children's painting class at the community center, a trip to visit a childhood friend in Vermont. She poured herself a glass of wine, the ruby liquid gleaming in the last rays of sunlight. She watched the first stars begin to prick the darkening sky, a woman at peace, finally free to discover who she was when nobody needed anything from her, when she could simply be. Tomorrow, she would plan Sunday dinner. But tonight, she was content, nestled in her newfound independence.